I'm Reverend Dr. Paul Marzon, and it's a joy to be here this evening to share this evening with you. And we're going to have a great conversation with Tim and Jenita Pace in a few moments. And before I do, I just want to introduce myself. I'm a pastor here locally at a church called Crossroads Church in northern Lakeville. And some of my background experience has been in the area of trauma and in recovery, and then also doing a lot of counseling around depression and grief. And so I was blessed when they gave me the call to say, would you be willing to MC tonight? I said, absolutely. I should have said you should ask my wife, but she's too busy because she's even better. She's a fire and police chaplain. In fact, she was just on call a few moments ago to report a death of someone who had passed away. And so she's actually with the family right now. And so one of those things that we are blessed in ministry, but also have to sometimes struggle with is dealing with the things that are harder walks of life with people and to come alongside them. I was so blessed yesterday because we're doing a sermon series actually on this very thing. We're talking about depression, loneliness, anger, and I've been telling people to come to this tonight. And yesterday I gave a quote actually from Jenita on the healing names of Jesus. And one of the sections in there that I shared with was the story that she gave about the blessing of a broken heart and how when your heart is broken, you can then share it with other people. And that was just so touching that when I shared it on Sunday, you could just see hardly a dry eye in the house. And it just goes to show that how your book and also your ministry has really helped bless so many people. And I think that's why there's such a great turnout tonight. Amen? And so without any further ado, I'll just kind of share with you, there's going to be a presentation tonight explaining some various things that are on their heart that we know that you came here tonight to hear. And also an opportunity for you to have some questions and answers given. So we'll be having the conversation, and then we'll also be having a break where you can go out in the hallway. There's going to be some books and things for sale that we'll talk more about later. And then you'll have that opportunity to come back in and share in some questions and answers. So do you mind if I pray with you? Is that okay? Oh, gracious, if you feel comfortable, put your hands all along with me. Gracious and loving God, we thank you for Tim and Jenita and just the blessing of their sharing tonight from their heart, but also from their experience of working with so many people. And Lord, we know that both their head and heart work together as they counsel and as they coach, as they advise and as they pray and as they share. And tonight we just pray through the power of your Holy Spirit, you use them as instruments of your love and grace. And it's in your name we pray. Amen.
We are so grateful that you are here tonight because this is a topic that is near and dear to our hearts because we have walked this journey. My name is Jenita Pace, and I'm a licensed professional counselor in Minnesota, and I wrote the book, The Healing Names of Jesus, and I'm an adjunct professor with the University of Northwestern. But more importantly, I'm someone that has walked this journey, and so tonight we're just so grateful that you're here.
And I'm Tim Pace. I'm Janita's husband. I'm the pastor of adult ministries and outreach at Trinity Evangelical Free Church in Minnesota. I received an undergraduate degree in Bible and in pastoral ministry from Columbia International University and a master's degree in theological studies also from Columbia International University.
And so tonight, like I said, we are going to be sharing our story. Now, this story is sometimes hard for people to hear because we are going to give you an inside look in what it's like for me as someone who has gotten to the very edge of my depression, and for Tim, who's a caregiver. And part of our passion is to address both those that are suffering and those who are trying to help those who are suffering. So tonight, we're going to walk you through our story and then give you some ideas and some tips on what we've learned along the way and what we've seen God do in our lives.
Our story really begins in college. Jenita and I met in undergrad in our sophomore year at Columbia International. I was there because I felt this strong calling into ministry. I grew up in North Carolina in the Bible Belt, and I became a believer when I was in high school. And I passionately wanted other people who grew up in a cultural Christianity, to have an authentic relationship with Jesus. I really saw myself becoming a pastor one day and giving my life to that calling. So when Jenita and I met, it felt like I'd found the perfect partner. Our visions were very similar for what we wanted in ministry, and so were our passions. And after a short courtship, I proposed to Jenita, and we got married in August of 2000. It was the summer before our senior year in undergrad.
When I say short, we dated for like 3 months, so. But we just knew. But shortly after we got married and we started our life together, I had always been very ambitious. I was working full-time, I was going to school, and I started to change. And I noticed those changes happened very rapidly. I began to have a hard time waking up. I just wanted to sleep all the time, and the covers on my bed felt so heavy. I was having a hard time focusing and concentrating, and so my work performance began to slip. And I began to feel very worthless, very broken. When I looked in the mirror, I did not like what I saw. And I had a hard time understanding what my worth was at that point. And so as I began to struggle, I began to withdraw and isolate. And the more I isolated, the more alone I was. The cycle just began to become out of control.
And as a young married couple still in college, we had our senior year yet to finish. We were pretty strapped financially, as you can imagine. I had to take on several different jobs to make ends meet. I was an associate pastor and a youth pastor at a small church plant. I was also painting houses and delivering office supplies while being a full-time student. It was a busy time. But you know, when Jenita and I were dating, the Jenita that I had come to know and love was a very capable, very strong person. And so I really didn't think anything about her being at home alone or me being gone for long periods of time, because she was just such a capable person. And to be honest, I really didn't even notice her symptoms, that she had been sleeping too much, that she was going out less and less. I just thought, really, because we had so much going on in our lives, that she was just tired.
Yeah, and the only way I can describe my depression at that point was, I tell people to picture what it's like if you fall into a well and you break both of your arms on the way down. And I'm at the bottom of this dark well, and I have no idea how to get out, and I don't have the physical capability to do it. But I don't want to have anyone else come down to get me. I don't want to ask for help. That's the last thing I want. And so you become stuck, because you can't do it yourself, but you definitely don't want your loved ones to have to struggle to come get you. And so as I got stuck there, suddenly I felt like there was only one way out, and it wasn't going to involve anyone else to help me. I finally decided the only way out was to commit suicide. And I decided that that was actually going to be a loving act, because I would be saving my family from having to come and rescue me. And I remember when I decided that was actually the most loving thing I could do for my husband.
You know, even though I didn't notice at first what was going on with Jenita, there was this point where I did start to notice. And as a pastor and doing things with church functions and that kind of thing all the time, I started to get really embarrassed that she wasn't coming to very many things, that she was staying at home. And looking back now, I'm ashamed to say I actually put a lot of pressure on her at that time to come to stuff. Like, why won't you come? Just come to this one thing. It's embarrassing, you know, when you're not there. And I didn't even realize it that even me putting that kind of pressure on her then just fed into the lies that she was already starting to believe from the enemy, that she was worthless, and even the lie that I would be better off without her, just because she was holding me back.
Yeah, and I think looking back, both of us didn't realize the tailspin that we were in at the time, and we weren't communicating about it. I was keeping it a secret, and when he did see signs, I begged him not to tell anyone, and so we were both very isolated. And I remember when I decided to commit suicide, I gathered the medications that I was going to use. I wrote something out to Tim. He left for work on Wednesday night, and I had prepared everything. And again, I really thought this was the most loving thing that I could do for him.
That night was a Wednesday, and I left for work like I always do. There was youth group that I was leading that night. But about halfway to church, it was like a 20-mile commute. I realized that I'd left my pager at home. And lately, Jenita had been...
Did you say pager?
Actually, I did say pager.
Just
this is a while ago.
This is an old story, Paul.
You might have to tell the younger crowd what that is, yeah.
So it was the only way that she could reach me at work, and she had been paging me a lot. And I thought, I really need to go back and get this. And it was going to make me late and everything, but I just thought I need to do it. So I turned the car around, and when I got back home, I opened the door, and what I saw when I saw the scene that I walked into, my world just stopped. Jenita was on the sofa crying, and she had this bottle of pills in her hand, and it was open. And I wasn't sure if I could believe what I was seeing. All I could think about was, I've got to get her to the hospital. I knew that she had been taking these pills. I didn't know how many of them she had taken. I didn't know what was going on, but I just knew I had to get her to the hospital. And she was crying, and then when I started to pick her up, she did not want to go, and I had to physically carry her out of the house, and she was fighting me every step of the way. She was actually angry with me, and she was pleading, please just leave me here. Let me finish what I was trying to do. And she fought so hard, this tiny little person, that she actually pulled a muscle in my lower back just trying to get her into the car. That's how hard she was fighting.
Yeah, and I was so shocked when he came home. And again, when it's so hard when the pain is in your head. And I was in so much pain. And when he came home, I felt like he took the power that I had to stop hurting away from me. And so when he came home, he was rescuing me. But in my upside down, twisted way of seeing things, he was taking away my opportunity to end the personal hell that I felt in my soul and in my head. And so the more he fought to tell me we have to go to the hospital, the more I fought back because I didn't want to suffer anymore. I did not want to suffer anymore. And so when I saw him, I saw my opportunity for relief going away.
And usually when you take someone to the hospital, they know they're sick. They even want to get to the hospital as quickly as they can because they want to be helped. But that was not the experience that we were having that night. And then when I got to the hospital, there was a certain expectation that I had because I'd taken people to the hospital before, and so I have this kind of expectation in my mind of what that was going to be like. But even that was very different. You know, the hospital staff actually once they found out what was going on, they took her away from me, and she was still fighting, so they forcibly took her. I had to sign documentation that night that she was being admitted against her will. And then I wasn't allowed to go back with her. I couldn't go see where they were putting her, what room she was going to be in. I couldn't help get her settled. They just took her back behind this door that locked behind them when they went in there. She was just taken from me. So there I was at the hospital alone, and then they told me that I can't even call her on the phone until they say I can, and it was going to be a while.
And I've been through so many scary experiences in my life, but I can tell you that was the scariest experience of my life. And for those of you in the room that maybe have been admitted to a psychiatric hospital, it's terrifying. You're searched and things are taken from you. And again, the nurses were doing what they needed to do. So they were handling it as lovingly as they could, but it's still scary. And they gave me my room. And I was told I had no contact with anybody outside of the hospital. And so I felt so isolated, so alone. My parents didn't even know at this point that I'd been struggling. I hadn't told any of my friends. And so Tim was going home alone. I was alone in the hospital. And I was in one of those situations, you know what it's like when you don't even know what to read in the Bible. I mean, you've come to a place where you don't even know what to look at. And so I was just flipping through the Bible, and I stumbled on Psalm 121, which is now my favorite psalm. And it talks about our help coming from heaven and that God doesn't sleep. And so because of my cognitive frustrations, because of the depression, I was having a hard time understanding. But I understood that psalm, and so I read it day and night over and over and over.
And like Jenita said, as she was feeling so alone in the hospital, I'd gone home and there was that similar kind of alone feeling. I walked into the door. The house was still a mess, the way that it was when I had left it. We had a small dog named Toby, a little Shih Tzu, and he was in the corner crying. And I remember that first night getting in bed, and Toby got into bed with me, and it was like for the first time, all of those visions that we had for our future, for the great ministry that we were going to do, for all of those youthful just dreams and ambitions that we had were just wiped away. And I had no idea what the future was going to hold. I had no idea what was coming next, where we were going to be. And it was just really, to say it was disorienting is just a huge understatement. But finally, the day came when she was going to get released, and I was going to get to go and pick her up. And so I went to the hospital, and it felt very much like the feeling when you're bringing your firstborn child home from the hospital, where I felt overwhelmed and happy. I was glad that she was coming home, but I also felt completely unprepared. And she was going through something that I had never experienced. I couldn't relate to her on hardly any level from the pain that she was experiencing, and from I couldn't relate to her challenges. And so I just didn't know what to do to care for her, but I just knew that I was glad to get her home.
And when I got home, I was so embarrassed and I was so ashamed because what I had worked so hard to keep a secret was now open for everyone to know. There was no hiding it now. And so I was hiding away in my house. I was so ashamed. And I had a dozen voicemails from different people wishing me well, letting me know that they were praying for me. And one of them was from a Bible professor we had at the time named Steve Bradley. And Steve just said, "Hey, Jenita, I was thinking about you last night. I sat up straight in bed, and I don't know why, but I feel like I'm supposed to read this to you." And he started reading Psalm 121. And I still get emotional because that was my sign that God did not leave. Have you been there where you thought, God's gone? And so I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know what was coming in the future, but that was my sign that he hadn't left me yet. And so Steve asked me, could I meet his wife, Pat? And I didn't want to meet anybody, so I said no. But he was insistent, and he said, Pat understands you because she had depression and when we were on the mission field, and this is her passion, and so you really should meet her. And Pat was very short and very opinionated, very stout, and very strong. And feisty. And she came over. And what was so beautiful is that Pat had the experience. She understood what I was talking about. I didn't have to explain this to her. And she just said, look, God's going to use this. And I know you don't believe it, but I will carry the hope for you. You just keep going, and I will carry it with you. And there'd be times when well-meaning people would try to give me books or advice, and they would kind of give me these, I call it the just do it Christians, just pray, just read. And she would say, Jenita, you can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps if you don't have bootstraps. And right now, you don't have bootstraps. And so she protected me from people well-meaning Christians who were giving me very difficult and hard advice.
And we really didn't know how alone we were going to be. I think Jenita had more of an instinct for that than I did. I felt completely naive looking back. But, I worked at a church. I was an associate pastor. I thought for sure the church is going to be an understanding and a safe place for me to be. And I'd taken some time off when Jenita was being released from the hospital to spend that with her. And so I began to call the pastor when it was time to go back to work, and I just said, can you come and see us and just pray for us? But days passed, and then I went back to work, and then I saw him at work, and no one ever came. And then so I decided to ask him again, could you come and just pray with us? I wanted to feel really like I had an ally in this, and so. Like I said, I asked him again, and then finally he said that he would come, and we set a date, and he came over. And when he got there, he brought a couple of the elders with him. And while they were there, they started to tell Jenita that she needed to start confessing her sins, and they were trying to figure out what sins it was that she had committed or we had committed that had led her into this depression. And when the light came on for me that's what was happening, I felt I couldn't believe it. I just felt so betrayed, and but my hurt quickly turned into anger. I thought all I want to do is get these guys out of my house, away from my wife before they make things worse. And so I quickly just kind of pushed them out. And then when they finally left, I realized for the first time that Steve and Pat were our only allies at the moment. And Jenita, who was already so embarrassed and felt so ashamed, she didn't want anyone to know. And now, because of the judgmental response that we got from our pastor and elders, that her fears were just being reaffirmed. Now she was really afraid. Now she was really embarrassed. Now she was really certain that we couldn't let anybody in. And before, I'd believed that we could be transparent, especially with church people and that kind of a thing. But what I realized was that her fears were founded in reality at that moment. And so now I was afraid to tell more people. I was afraid to reach out, and then because the pastor was my boss and the elders were over me, I thought I might even lose my job because of this.
Yeah, and you don't know who to trust. And you still might struggle. Who do you trust with this information? What Christians are going to understand and which ones aren't? Well, Pat and Steve continued to be daily in our lives. Pat would call me in the morning. If I wasn't up, she would drive over to my house. She would help me get out of bed. She was coaching me. There were times when I couldn't understand the Bible because my cognitive skills were so injured by the depression. And so she would tell me Bible stories, and she would tell me Psalms because she knew I couldn't read them. And if I got confused, then she would explain them to me. And so she was almost, imagine like somebody baby feeding someone the Bible. I mean, she was really just providing me the sustenance I needed in a way that I could understand it. And I began to get stronger, and I began to understand more and more about what depression meant, and that I didn't have to be ashamed. But again, I wasn't sure who I could trust my story with. And about 3 weeks into Pat mentoring me, I got a phone call from Tim. He was at work, and he was distraught. And he told me that Pat had died suddenly. It was a medical situation, and she had died very suddenly. And I was so angry. I told God, you took my one person. You gave me one person, and you took them. And so I remember putting on my shoes. I thought, I'm going to go for a walk. I didn't know what I was going to do. And I was walking to the mailbox, and I was just angry. Have you been angry at God before? Frustrated. You took my one person. And I got to the mailbox. I'll never forget it. I opened the mailbox, and there was a letter she mailed the day she died. And it just said, God will use this. And I thought, I don't believe it, but maybe now I do. Because I needed that note. And she wrote down, all it said, it's just like Pat, it was the shortest card ever. It just said, I'm writing this down because I know you don't believe me, but I want you to remember that God will use this. Like a big smiley face. And so I took that card home, and I thought, okay, I don't know what's coming next, and I understand that we're in the middle of probably the hardest time in our marriage, but God will use this.
You know, as part of the conditions of her release from the hospital, Jenita was required to go to counseling. And so we started to interview Christian counselors, and we interviewed several of them that I just thought they're not a good fit for different reasons. And then finally we did find this lady who worked well for us. And so we were talking to her in one of our first sessions, and I was telling her how people at church kind of didn't know how to respond to us anymore. They didn't know how to treat us it was like all of a sudden we were broken, and so people didn't want to like touch us or get close to us because of that. And I said, we need some support. I knew that we needed somebody else, and we just lost Pat not very long ago, and so she said in that meeting that you guys need to move back to Minnesota. If you go to Minnesota, Janita's parents are there, her family's there. They've only known Jenita the way that she has always been, and they're going to treat her the way that the way they've always treated her, and it'll help her to find herself again. And in that moment, I don't know if you've had these experiences before when the Holy Spirit just touches your heart, and you know that those are words that are just right on. And I knew that was absolutely the right advice. So that after the session, we went home. We called Janita's parents and asked if it'd be possible for us, if we were to move to Minnesota, to stay with them for a while until we could kind of get our feet on the ground. And so, of course, they agreed wholeheartedly. And the very next day, I turned in my notice at work.
Yeah, so we moved to Minnesota, and I have to say it was so refreshing to be around people that knew the real me. I mean, I fell into the arms of my parents, my cousins, my brothers, people who recognized who I was and that what was happening to me wasn't the actual me. And they advocated for me. They helped me figure out that maybe a dialectical behavior therapy program would be good, which is an outpatient group therapy program. I was trying to get on medications, and it wasn't going well. And so with me as I was trying to sort that out. And so it's kind of like suddenly we had a team of people around me, and those people knew me. They knew the real me, and they knew that this was just a challenge I was going through.
And from my perspective, especially for the first year, I didn't really see a lot of stability yet in Jenita and the depression and that kind of thing. And I'd gotten a job, and so I'd go to work, and then Jenita, after a while that year, had gotten a job, and so she would go to counseling, and she would go to work, and then she would come home, and just living through that normal daily kind of stuff like that was just a lot for her, and she would be exhausted. And we stayed with her folks for about 10 months, and then we bought a house and moved out. We thought we're ready to be kind of on our own again for a while. But the problem quickly arose that I didn't think that I could go and leave her at home alone. I had this fear that if I leave her alone, what am I going to walk back into when I get home? And so every time I'd go get groceries or run errands or do whatever, I was afraid of what I was going to find when I got home. And it turned out that those were not irrational fears. Not long after we moved in to our home, I did come home, and Jenita was in the garage with the car running. The door was down when I got there, and the windows of the car were open. And again, I just thought, oh, I don't know what to do about this. I mean, is this like, do we need to go back to the hospital? It felt like these huge steps backward. And so I was terrified, and I got more and more scared every day that she was going to be successful in taking her life. And so not only did I have this fear, but I had this guilt that if I did leave her alone, and she was successful, and I came home and found that it was going to be my fault. And the scary times didn't just happen when I was alone, when she was alone. I remember another night when I was sitting in bed reading, and Jenita had gone to take a bath. And we lived alone. We didn't have any kids yet then. And when she went into the bathroom, she locked the door, which she never did. And I heard the click, and I just thought, what's going on? I knew something had to be off. And I went and I was talking to her through the door, and she didn't sound right. And I asked if she would let me in, and she wouldn't. So I pried the door open with a screwdriver, and she was in the bathtub, crying, and she was clutching this knife this big knife that she got out of the kitchen. And she was crying. While I saw her there crying, I just thought she doesn't want to die, but she doesn't want to live. And then when I tried to take the knife from her, I knew that she didn't want to give up the knife, but she didn't want to use the knife to harm herself either. Though she was in this, I could sense the back and forth that was going on in her mind, and just this trouble of I don't want to live, but I don't want to die, and there was just this real intense struggle. And that was one of the first times that I felt like God gave me a supernatural empathy. I actually could feel what she was feeling at that moment, and it gave me so much, such a heart for her, even more that I wanted to help her.
Yeah, and it was such a moment when he realized that this is what it was. It was a moment when I wanted to live. I wanted to live, but I didn't want to hurt anymore. It's this tug and pull where you don't want to be in pain anymore, and you feel like the only way out is to die, but you don't want to die. And so it's a constant back and forth, back and forth. And there were times when I could handle the pain and I was learning skills, and there were times when the pain would get the best of me. And I also know that the enemy was involved in that. I mean, there were times when I felt like I was not just up against myself, but I was up against more than that. And so it was a moment when Tim had a deeper understanding of what was happening inside of me, that I wanted to live, but I didn't want to live this way.
And I continued to feel this immense responsibility to care for her, to protect her, but also to save her life. And as a result of that, I really isolated myself. And I knew that was happening. I knew that I was being isolated from other people, but I felt trapped. I didn't know what else to do because of this responsibility I had to make sure that she didn't commit suicide. And I remember really well having this conversation one night with Jenita's mom, Teresa, and I was kind of explaining that feeling to her, and Teresa said, Tim, you can't be responsible for saving her life or keeping her from taking her life. That's too big for you. You can't do that. And so you have to be able to let yourself go to the grocery store and those things. And that meant so much to me coming from her, because this was a person who I knew loved her and cared for her and wanted what was best for her and didn't want her to die. And so it was like having that kind of permission from somebody who was like that in her life was just incredibly freeing for me, and it helped me to start to think that I could live a life that wasn't so isolated. And then Jenita also was concerned about me. She's a wonderful person, and having depression didn't make her be less of an amazing person, and didn't make her care about me any less. And so she knew that I was having this struggle, and that I was having a hard time, leaving the house and staying away. And she suggested that I see a Christian counselor as well, just for myself. And so I found a counselor, and it really was helpful. It's powerful to have a third-party person who also knows the Lord, but has an outside looking in kind of perspective. And especially if that person is someone who is leading you back to Jesus and reminding you of the good news of the gospel regularly. And so it really helped me to keep a balance between caring for Jenita and caring for myself. And I think that counselor helped me a lot in that. And so because of the counselor's advice and the support of my mother-in-law, I did begin to go out and see friends. I got a gym membership. I joined a basketball league and some of those things. And then the counselor also helped me work through guilt. I had such tremendous guilt for leaving the ministry and feeling like God called me to do something, and now I feel like I definitely need to care for my family and care for my wife, but wasn't I called into ministry, and what's happening now, and is the call gone, or am I leaving God's will, and all of these kind of questions that were coming up for me, and the counselor was helping me to see that for this period of time in my life that I was called to care for Jenita. Well, I was called to be that person in my family that was doing that. And just because I had stepped away from ministry didn't mean that was a permanent stepping away from ministry. That our story was still being written, and that there was still hope for me to be back into the ministry one day. And I began to kind of believe that and dare to think that might be the case, even though I knew that when we would have conversations about it, Jenita was like, "Oh, I do not want to go work for a church again like the last time." We know what that happened. So I knew that this was going to be a long road, but it was like that was the time when I finally felt hope that there was going to be a kind of a light at the end of this tunnel, or more chapters to our life that hadn't been written yet.
Well, as I went to therapy, as I went to programs, I decided to sign up for everything I could find that had to do with mental health. And so I was going to different support groups. I was going to therapists, and I was gaining skills, and I was getting my medication figured out. And as I got stronger and stronger, we began to discuss, now what does our next phase of our life look like? And we ended up moving to North Carolina unexpectedly because of because of the economy. Tim lost his job, and so we had to transfer down there. And I thought, well, now what do I do? And it was refreshing. I started in a new place, so nobody knew my story. We went to a church, nobody knew my history, and it was refreshing to not be known as the depressed girl, to have nobody knew. And I was trying to find a job, and I wasn't sure what to do, and there was one university within driving distance that had a master's in counseling. And I told Tim one night, wouldn't it be crazy if I became a counselor? And but the whole time I was in therapy, I remember telling my therapist, who was not a believer, so many things you're telling me is actually in the Bible. I think I could be a counselor. And he said, well, let's not overdo it. But I applied to this university, and I thought, I'm just going to be transparent. So I wrote out my story. And they were only taking 30 people, and they had 150 applicants. And so I thought, well, we'll see. And they said, yes, we think that actually your experience might add something really important to the field. And so I began the journey of becoming a therapist. And it was so refreshing to finally, I could hear Pat's voice in the back of my head when I went to class. This kind of like sweet, I told you so. And so as I went to school and I got into the school systems, I started as a school counselor. It was really encouraging to meet with people because when they told me their stories, I could tell them, yes, I understand exactly what you're talking about.
So we moving on to the...
Yeah, well, and you ended up in ministry again. I mean, in our move, you went back to seminary.
Yeah, while that was going on with Jenita, I'd been working in a factory job. I was like, when we get to North Carolina, I just want a job that pays the bills and has insurance, really good insurance. And so I was working midnight to 8 a.m. at a factory, but we had gotten involved in this church that was it was really such a gospel-filled, gospel-drenched place, and they had been planting other churches, and the opportunity came up for me to become an intern there, and as an intern there, I also had to go back to seminary, and I talked to Jenita about it, and finally she was at a point where she was ready for us to take those steps, and I think all of that time and distance, but then especially being in a church where the people loved us, where they cared for us, where the grace of God was just oozing out of the pores of all of the people there, then she was like, okay, and so it was so exciting for me to take that job, to go to seminary and start working on that degree, and just to see that there are more steps forward.
And so that's kind of been our story and our journey. And along the way, we have gathered all of the steps that we've taken and the ways that we've had to work through this in our marriage, because obviously depression impacts relationships. And so we wanted to share with you some of the things that we found helpful. And as we were putting this together, we realized these are the things that we wish somebody would have told us back when we first started this journey.
So I get to go first?
You do.
Well, my perspective obviously is the perspective of the caregiver, or the person with a loved one who is experiencing depression, and so I want to just speak to the people in the room here or who are watching that are in that position, or maybe you're friends of a person who is in that position. And so the first thing that you maybe know this instinctively, but it helps to hear it out loud. Remember, you're not Jesus. You know Jesus. You can lead people to Jesus. You can bring the person that you're caring for to the feet of Jesus, but you're not Jesus. You can't save anyone. You can't be omnipresent. You can't stay at home all the time and not go get groceries because you're so worried about the person that you're caring for. You can't be that person, but you can bring the person that you're caring for to the feet of Jesus in prayer and by helping, and by coming to church or encouraging them in all kinds of different ways. So remember, you're not Jesus. And then the next thing I would say is develop a care team. In Mark chapter 2, there's this great story that most people who've been in church for a while know it, about these 4 friends who carry literally their paralytic friend to Jesus, who's teaching in this home, and they tear the roof off and they lower him down right at the feet of Jesus. And no one of those friends could have done that alone. They needed the other 3 to help them to be able to do that. And so you can't be one person alone in this journey. You need to have a care team, and so I would say a great therapist, a great Christian counselor is a wonderful way to start. Not just for the person you're caring for, but probably for you as well. And then hopefully you're in a church that's already like this, but find a church that understands mental illness. Find a church that oozes the gospel, that brings you back again and again to the feet of Jesus. And then, you need to identify in your group of friends, the people that you know, and that includes family as well, who are the safe people. And that's going to be a really hard process for you. You're going to have some really close friends, maybe friends that you've known for a long time, that you find in this instance and with this particular thing are not safe anymore for you. And maybe some of the people that aren't safe are your family members, or some of your family members. And maybe it's your church that you find out, like we did, that wasn't a safe place for us then. And identifying that and keeping really strong boundaries, or some keeping those people at arm's length is an important part of the process. And remember, that doesn't mean you're pushing them out of your life forever. They're not on some blacklist, but this is a season, and in this season of life, that those people aren't safe. So you need to find the people that are safe. And 2 of the things that I always looked for was, 1, did they point me back to Jesus? They didn't just give cliche answers to things. They would bring me back to Jesus. They would pray with me. Those are the kind of friends that you need to have around you. And then not only are they the friends that bring you back to Jesus, but they're the friends that when you're talking to them, the things that they're saying, you recognize that they're in this for the long haul. that they're not going anywhere. That was one thing that Pat told us over and over again. I'm not going anywhere. We didn't know that God was going to take her away, but we knew it. We could see it in her eyes. We knew that she was going to be in this for the long haul. And so, and then I would also say, as part of the care team, you yourself need to take care of yourself. And we've already kind of talked about that some, but make sure that you have people in that friend group that you have, the kind of friends that you want to help the person that you're caring for, but they're also the friends that you need to help you. And so to have all these kind of varieties of friends, there might be the friends that are going to be a lot of fun, and they're going to take you out, and you can go ride go-karts or something together and just forget about things. And then there are those friends that are going to sit on the couch with you and cry and not say anything for the next 4 hours because they just know that you need somebody to be with you. And you need to have all of those kind of friends. And then I would say that if you're a person that maybe you're listening to us right now and you say, you know what, I want to be that kind of friend, but I've already messed up. I've already said the wrong thing too many times. I already wasn't understanding about mental illness or depression or whatever it may be. I just want to encourage you, just apologize and say, I want to now be that kind of friend for you. What do I need to know that would help me be a better friend for you? Is there a book I can read, a podcast I can listen to? Is there advice that you can give me that I can follow so I can be a better friend for you? It's not too late to be that kind of friend for somebody. And so have those friends, and draw boundaries, really firm boundaries around those people that aren't safe. And then once you find those friends, and I would add to that, know your in this case it was my wife. I had to get to know my wife's friends, the friends that she had that were just her friends that I didn't really know, and I had to get to know her friends. I had to learn their phone numbers. I had to even kind of learn their schedules a little bit to know when I could call them and if they were the kind of person that would come over and, while I would go play basketball or do whatever. I had to get to know them because they're such an important part of helping you care for the people or the person that you're trying to care for. So definitely get to know your friends. And then I would say, when you've identified the safe people, you need to let your guard down with those people. It's a very scary thing to do. To all of a sudden to be open up. You need to trust your friends to be the kind of people or the family to be the kind of family that you don't have to clean the house before they come over. You can have dirty laundry in the bathroom floor or whatever, and it's okay. And you need to be able to let those walls down. And I would say if you are the friend, if you are that kind of friend, reciprocate that. It's really hard to be when Jenita was going through the darkest part of her depression, and even a lot of this journey, I really felt like we became friends who were takers. We didn't get to give back. And that's a hard place. We don't want to be that kind of person. We don't want to be the kind of friend that never gives back. And so, but when we had friends that would have us come over and help them with things, or that would let their guard down as well and say, you know what, I've really had a crummy week, and I just want to sit here on the couch with you and, binge watch Friends or something. Be that kind of friend that reciprocate the transparency or model that transparency, and it makes the person that you're friends with, it makes it so much easier for them to do the same thing. And then I would say, remember that you're not going to do this perfectly. Your friends aren't going to do it perfectly. Your church isn't going to do it perfectly. You're going to mess up from time to time. And you're going to say the wrong thing, or you're not going to be there. Or you're going to get selfish and say, you know what, any other night but tonight, I'm not going to miss this, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to do whatever I want. And you're going to have those times. And so you need to, first of all, be okay with the fact that that's going to happen, but then be the person that comes back and apologizes quickly. On your best days, you're going to be slow to speak and quick to listen and slow to become angry. Those are your best days. But when the times are really hard and depression is one of those journeys that goes on and on and on, those best days might become pretty few and far between for a while. And so, of course, we want to be, quick to listen and slow to speak and slow to become angry. But when we don't, we need to apologize. We need to say, you know what, I messed up again. And one of the blessings of that, one of the blessings of saying, I messed up and here's how I messed up and I really didn't want to do that, is that the person that you're caring for, the person with depression, is going to be able to say, you know what, they're not perfect after all. You know what, it's like, in a way, and you correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I could see it with Jenita, like she, it was like, oh, he's not perfect either, as if she had any, delusion that I was perfect. But, like whenever I would apologize, it was like, oh, it's almost like a relief that there's somebody else that's going through something or somebody else is human. And so be that kind of person and do it quickly and do it consistently. Because that consistency means so much. The consistency reminds the person that you're caring for over and over again that you're not going anywhere. You're in this for the long haul. You're not going to be perfect, but you're not going to run away either. There's not going to be a time when it gets so hard that you are going to leave. And so anytime that we apologize or come back, it just reinforces the fact that we're not going anywhere. And then I would say, over time, trust your instincts. I had no instincts at the beginning, or horrible instincts at the beginning of the journey, but over time, as with trial and error and that kind of a thing, I started to learn, like, okay, I can push Jenita here a little bit. Like, I can really get her to go out and go for a walk with me, and she's having a good enough day where I can do that, and I know the walk will be good for her. And then there are other days when you know that it won't be, and you're going to have to shut something down or cancel a plan, and you'll start to develop an instinct for that, and you need to trust your instincts on that. And then the relationship that you have with the person you're caring for is so vitally important when it comes to that relationship. Jenita and I had a conversation, and I really recommend that you do this if you haven't done this, where there were so many and I would say years, where I was trying to guess if is this really as bad as she's saying it is in this moment? Because, I mean, I can go and see people. I can go out with friends. I can do these things. Like, it's so easy. I love it. How can it possibly be so bad that, that she doesn't want to do it or she can't do it? And I would start to, at times, second guess her. And we had this conversation where I said, you know what? I'm not going to do that anymore. When you say something to me that you can't do this or you need this, I'm going to believe you. Right away, I'm going to believe you. I'm going to act on the fact that that's completely true. And that gives you tremendous power. You can manipulate me. You can do a lot of things to me if you decide to misuse that. And I need to know that you're not going to misuse that, but I'm not going to second guess anything that you say anymore. I'm going to take it at face value, and I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. And you need friends in your life who are going to be able to do that with you as well, that are going to give you the benefit of the doubt when you have to make a decision or say no to something that they don't really understand at the time. It's so important to have that kind of friendship. And because I remember, like, there was about a 2-year period where I felt like the only time I ever called friends was to cancel some plans that we had with them. I was just like all the time canceling plans, and it felt so terrible. But those friends were the kind of friends that gave me the benefit of the doubt, that gave Jenita the benefit of the doubt, and weren't going to stop being our friends because we had to cancel on them last minute for something that they didn't quite understand. And so, and then finally, this is the last thing I'll say, but just remember the gospel. The gospel is good news. There's all kinds of lies that the enemy's going to want to feed you, and even like there'll be times that the enemy is feeding Jenita lies, and then she was telling them to me so convincingly that I was like, oh man, I need to believe that too. And you have to go back over and over to the gospel, to the fact that God loves you so much that he gave his son for you, that he that his love for you is not conditional, that it's never going to change. There's nothing that you can do that's going to make him love you more or less than he does right now. You need to remember the true gospel. We've talked a lot about Psalm 121 tonight, but even like Psalm 103 is for me like what 121 has been for Jenita. There's so much gospel in that psalm. It's, because there's hope that the God that we know redeems us from the pit. He forgives us. He heals our diseases. He renews our youth. He fights for us when we're oppressed. We don't have to wonder if the things that we're going through are like some sort of punishment from God, because he says in Psalm 103 that he separated, he doesn't know our iniquities anymore. He separated our sins as far as the east is from the west, and that his loving kindness is everlasting. He says he knows our frame. He knows how fragile we are. He knows all of those things about us, and yet his love and his kindness are from everlasting to everlasting. And that's just in Psalm 103. And there's so much more of the gospel in the Bible, so seek it out yourself. Find the people who are going to show you more of the truth of the gospel, because it sounds like good news, because it is good news and it's true, and you need it, and you have to have it over and over again.
Oh, amen. And now, speaking to those of you in the room that are struggling, wanted to give you a few hopeful encouragements to you. The first word that I always think of is hope. Hope is your engine that's driving you. If you lose hope, then that really is when things get dark. And I remember getting so frustrated because when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see myself. I saw a shell of who I knew I was. And I think what I had to realize is that the recovery process is very long. And it's like a ladder. And if the ladder rungs are too far apart and you're trying to do too much too fast, you can't do it. And when you fail, you'll tell yourself, I'm never getting out of this. And so what I had to do is I had to bring down my expectations every day to what I could manage. And I'm telling you, there were days when it was work just to get out of bed and brush my teeth. And at first I thought, that is pathetic. I mean, Jenita Pace, you can do so much more than that. But on that day, that was the most that I could do. And what's so beautiful is that the gospel says that God loves us, not because of what we do, but because of who we are in him. And so the idea that day, my act of worship was brushing my teeth. That day, that's all I could give, and God was pleased with that. And so my first offer of encouragement is make sure that your ladder rungs are low enough that you can actually grab them and reach them. Understanding that this is a process. We are decades into this process. And so it continues to be every day having to evaluate what are my goals today and what can I reasonably do today. The second thing is to realize that you are in a spiritual warfare. And I've met people who have said to me, wow, it's so inspiring to meet someone who has overcome depression. And the good and bad news is I haven't overcome depression. And I hope that doesn't discourage you. What I'm saying is that I'm still in the battle, and I think I'll be in the battle until I get to go home. The truth of it is that my depression has actually become somewhat of a spiritual superpower in the sense that I have to be with Jesus every day. I cannot afford a day where I'm not with him because he's everything that gets me through. And I love how in the New Testament, Jesus is called a doctor. He uses that term to describe himself, that he's there to help the sick. And so I am so mentally sick that I have to be with my doctor every single day, and I cannot afford to lose a day. And so I have to tell you that although I do not like my depression, I get tired, I get frustrated, I get angry with it, I wonder what I would be like if I didn't have it. And so my challenge for you is I meet people who say, as soon as I can't wait for this to be over. And maybe your story will be that it will end. For me, it's not going to end. But I'm learning the tools that I can to fight it off. And I'm staying in the Word much more than I think I would if I didn't have depression. Another thing that I would tell you is make sure you're open to treatments. There are so many options now. There are so many amazing things that they are doing. Different counselors are providing. And I have Christians who tell me they're scared of trying treatments. But I'm telling you that there are so many things that psychologists are discovering, even if they're not Christians, they have great ideas. And so I encourage you, don't be afraid to try something. And I know medications are frustrating. I can't tell you how many medications we went through before we finally found the right one. And it was a nightmare. And so if you're struggling with that, I want to affirm you. I know that it's a nightmare. And there was even a point where we found one that worked, and then a few years later, we were told it wasn't going to work anymore. And so I understand that challenge, but please stick in there. If you go to a counselor and it's terrible, don't write off counseling. I've been to some terrible counselors, and I've been to some great counselors. And so I'll have people say, well, I tried that. And I'm like, honestly, this is a battle. You have to keep trying. And counseling is kind of like dating. You have to go, see if you click with this person. If you don't, move on to the next one. There are many out there. So I just want to encourage you. I know it's a long process. And there are two lies that I want to address that I think go to the heart of my depression, and maybe they go to the heart of yours too. The first one is that the suffering is pointless. And I can't tell you how many times I've thought that. And I've said to God, can you imagine what I could do if I wasn't depressed? I mean, wouldn't that impress you? But the truth of it is that Pat was right. Now, I will tell you that we hid this story for years. When my book came out and we finally started sharing it, we had lots of people in our life who said, why didn't you tell us? Why did you keep this to yourselves? And the truth is that it's hard to talk about. Even tonight, it's hard to talk about. But what we see is that when we're transparent, it gives other people an opportunity to share their story. And so what I want to tell you is, if you're in the process of your depression, but you haven't come to a place where you feel like you've conquered it, it doesn't mean you don't have a testimony, and it doesn't mean you don't have a story worth talking about. It's transparency that tells other people, hey, we're in this. And it gives other people an opportunity to say, me too. And I can't tell you how many people we came out, we told our story, and people that we've known for years said, yeah, privately we had the same thing going on. And so don't wait till your story has a nice bow on it to tell it. You can tell it as you go along. And I hate that God is slow. Someday I'm going to tell him that I didn't like how slow he acted. I one time had a professor in college say, because I was telling my professor, Professor Lehman, I said, I'm frustrated because this depression is so slow. When will I be better? And he said, Jenita, I'm sorry, but if God started a nation with barren women, one baby at a time, I guarantee he's not in a hurry with you. And I hated that, but I've always remembered that. And so I promise you, he is not in a hurry. But when I look back, if we hadn't struggled with this for decades, we wouldn't have an appreciation of how hard it is. So when I have someone come to my office and they're telling me where they're at, I remember very well. Because that wasn't just one day for me, that was years, or that was months. And my last piece of, hopefully, encouragement to you is the lie that you're worthless, because that's a lie that gets right to the core. I notice that when we get together in groups, when we get together with people, one of the first questions we ask is, what do you do? And it's a cultural question, what do you do? But that's not the question that Jesus asks. You see, he's in love with you because he created you. Before the creation of the world, he dreamed about you. You were in his mind. And when you came to life, in Ephesians 2:10, it says, you are a masterpiece. And when we go to art galleries, we don't go and wait for the art to perform for us. We just go to look at it. And you are hanging in God's art gallery, and he is so proud of you. And that's the beauty, is that tonight you don't have to earn your right to be alive. Isn't that incredible? He is so in love with you. One of my favorite concepts is Zephaniah. You know, we've gone to beautiful waterfalls in North Carolina. We've hiked. We've seen beautiful scenery, and it's just inspiring. But what's so incredible is what inspires God is you. In Zephaniah, it says that he sings about you. So when you go to bed at night, it says that he's singing over you. And I can't help but think, with what a musician he is, that he's probably written songs that are just about you. And so I want you to capture that in your mind. The next time that depression lies to you and says that you are worthless, the truth is that you can't even declare yourself worthless. You don't even have the power to decide that you're worthless, because the Creator and the Redeemer of the world has already chosen you and loves you. And so I want to finish out with my favorite psalm. I know yours is great, but mine's great too. I want to read to you Psalm 121. I lift my eyes up to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over you will neither slumber or sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your comings and goings, both now and forever. Thank you.
Wow, wasn't that fantastic? Praise God. We'll be taking a break in a few moments. Terry, could you bring that book up that I set down in the front there? I appreciate it. I wanted to be able to share both books. I had this one on my lap because I actually have read through this several times, and it's such a blessing to me and my wife. I think you can use it as something to, you just talked about the whole marriage thing, and I think many times when one person is struggling, the other one is a caregiver, you work on things together. And I think that that's a really huge blessing you shared. I have one other analogy I wanted to share. When you talked about certain churches, in my doctoral study, I talked about there's various churches, and they all work great to bring people to the kingdom of heaven. Some are Carnival cruise ships. They have great Lido decks, right? And they have wonderful music and wonderful worship, and they just bless people that way. And there's some churches that are kind of battleships, and it sounds like you hit a battleship church, where they're really good with rules and regulations and uniforms, right? And they have the right things to do and the wrong things to do. But then there are rescue ships. And rescue ships are a different style church. And they take a very different style of ministry. And I'm glad you have found a rescue ship church. And that you found a place where healing and hope can prevail. And so if you are in that place, or you know people that are in that place, all the churches south of the river here, I love them all. I know a lot of the pastors. I'm part of the Lakeville Ministerium. And each church has a special purpose in the kingdom of heaven. But sometimes rescue ship churches are needed where other churches can't do the same kind of ministry. And so I think that's a great recommendation. Not every church is for everybody.